The panel appointed to probe the introduction of a basic income support has recommended that the country should institute basic income support for adults with no income in a phased approach, beginning with the institutionalization and stabilization of the COVID-19 social relief of distress grant. The report came out yesterday, and we're joined to discuss it by Busisiwe Sibeko. She's a researcher and budget policy lead for the Institute for Economic Justice, and she's part of that panel. Busisiwe, thank you very much, Sibeko, for joining us this afternoon. If we could just perhaps give a review or, a breakdown of how we came to this recommendation.
No, thank you, and thank you for having me here. I think, over the last 2 years, we have seen the vulnerabilities in our economy and really the failure for systemic change that would lead to many people being income secure. And so this document comes, and this conversation is not starting now. The 2002 Taylor report already made an argument for basic income grant, and of course there are many grants that were phased in since then. But this document really is important in this current context because it argues for protection or income protection or minimum income for people between the ages of 18 and 59 who have been systematically excluded for decades, even though it is written in our constitution that people have the right to social assistance, and that is not dependent on age, in fact. So it is a very critical document in this current context as we see that unemployment has increased significantly. I mean, we're looking at about 45% of our population in the expanded definition of people who are not employed. And in provinces that are poorer, Limpopo and so forth, about half of the population, in fact, is unemployed. So we see that people are income poor. And so this is very critical in terms of next steps for how our government can ensure that those people have at least their basic necessities.
As you rightfully mentioned, this is not the first time, these kind of conversations are happening as we flirt with the 50% unemployment mark. But there are people who are arguing that perhaps we cannot afford this, and maybe that is why, we're seeing these prices or these numbers or the amount being the way they are.
I mean, it's not necessarily, about whether we can afford to. I think everyone on the panel agreed that we have to. And we really have to be creative. We have to rethink economics and what our macroeconomic policy can do to be able to provision, the basic income grant, or whatever you want to call it, basic income, they've called it BIS. And so it's very critical that we think about how to create the macroeconomic space to be able to do so. And as the Institute have put forward many financing options, and in fact in the document as well, they explore some financing options. And so it is critical that we do it, and it's a matter of how we're going to do it. And the document is very clear on a sequencing approach to it, right? How do we ensure that gradually we get to the level in which we aspire to, whether it be the upper bound poverty line or whatever we'll decide as a society, because again, the discussions are still ongoing. It is not written in stone, even though the document has been produced. And so there are many ways in which we can do this. And of course, there was a lot of debate around taxes, which taxes to increase, how do we redistribute within our system, how do we ensure redistribution and so forth. And there are many monetary policy tools. There are many, many tools in the economics kitchen, as Duma Kobule likes to call it, that we can utilize. We just have to be creative and rethink our macroeconomic framework entirely.
Rethink the economics in a country like South Africa. I wonder, when we have these conversations, do we speak to people that will be receiving this grant? I ask you that with relation to knowing just how much it would take to maintain a household.
Absolutely. I mean, we do, that was brought up in the discussion yesterday, and I think it is very critical that we always include the people that we are speaking of when we have these discussions, right? As Busisiwe, I'm not necessarily in need of the grant itself, but it is important that we engage those who are going to be beneficiaries of it. And there are a lot of organizations in civil society doing that very important work of engaging on the ground continuously with people who are going to, who need need or considered to be needing of this grant. I mean, we know from the Peter Maritzburg group, for example, that a food basket costs 4,000 Rand for a household, right? And so we know that the current rates that are being proposed are not as high as needed. The cost of living in South Africa is high, and I think all of us can attest to that. And so even though the levels are not necessarily reflecting 4,000 Rand, which is the basic need, we do need some steps and sequencing to get to whatever level that we'll decide as a society, as I've already said. These are the building blocks, and they're critical discussion points or ways to begin the broader dialogue in the South African context about the need for grants. I think what was important about yesterday's document was that it makes the argument that we need it. And we kind of in that first phase, that phase where we need a broad consensus that we actually want to do this. And you know, once that consensus is built, then we start building on that. And of course, we've been writing for a long time on the issue, but of course, there's always room for discussion and so forth, which I envision will carry on going forward. And I think the Department of Social Development has been very proactive in engaging social partners, which I think really all departments in South Africa should learn from. This idea of participation in public forums about a critical issue such as this.
Critical work being done in the background, and I wonder what kind of conversations are being had, right? So you have some sectors of the population that believe that perhaps we should look at giving people, you know, dignity in terms of going about your day. When you wake up, you know that you've got purpose, you've got something to do, versus giving people grants.
Yeah, I mean, the jobs versus grants debate is long-standing. And in fact, one of the things that the report highlights, and a lot of research has highlighted, is that getting grants actually can be an enabler of people to be able to participate in the labor markets. One of the, you know, facts or statistics that they cite in the document is that women who are, you know, caregivers, or women who are caregivers and receiving the child grant on behalf of their children are 15% more likely to be working, you know, because, or are likely to work because they've got this access to income, which, you know, allows some sort of liberties. I mean, if you need to send your child to creche so that you can look for a job, and there's long-standing evidence in South Africa that shows that, you know, because of the time use, the amount of time, for example, women spend doing unpaid care work means that they're not looking for jobs at that time. So we need to think about it as income that allows for some sort of flexibility in somebody's ability to be able to have access to productive work. The other end is that our economy is simply not generating jobs. We're not going to generate 11 million jobs by tomorrow. And in the interim, while we build these, you know, these jobs, we need to be very serious about making sure that people have the right to dignity in itself, that people have the right to access basic services, that people have the right to basic income. Right, and so this is part of a broader framework. Of course, a basic income grant is not a silver bullet, and we've never put it as such, but to understand it as one of the tools that we can use in our current economic social policies as a way to really think about and take seriously the constitution of the country, as well as to bolster our economy, because of course, when you give people money, they spend it in their localities, in the economy. It does generate economic activity in itself, and so to think of it in that almost between economic and social, it is not just, you know, money that goes into a deep hole somewhere and people are just sitting at home doing nothing. It is critical for our economy and social stability at this current moment.
I wonder then, ma'am, what happens now? You have put forth this recommendation, and what?
I mean, the next steps, I think it's really to say that, of course, this will continue in broader discussions, but of course, broader engagement is needed with the National Treasury, because at the end of the day, National Treasury are the ones who make the decision about whether to allocate funding towards it or not. But of course, this is, you know, I think they're needed. What we need is a clear indication that the SRD itself will be extended. And I think the paper makes a clear argument for that. So really, you know, in our winnings, we need to say what is happening in February 2022, which National Treasury has indicated to us. We won't know until then. So, you know, our biggest win would be to know immediately, as soon as possible, what will happen in February 2022. But of course, understanding that in the medium, not even medium, as soon as possible, as soon as we can, we have to start implementing a basic income grant.
Ma'am, thank you for the work that you do. Busisiwe Sibeko, researcher and budget policy lead at the Institute for Economic Justice. Thank you.